It is 4:30 in the morning on June 4th, 1942. 240 nautical miles northwest of Midway, Commander Minoru Genda stands on the bridge of the aircraft carrier Akagi. Despite suffering from pneumonia and clad only in his pajamas, he watches as the Imperial Japanese Navy prepares to unleash the most formidable armada in its history. Emerging from the pre-dawn gloom are 4 carriers, 11 battleships, and a support force of over 200 vessels, a fleet that, after 6 months of war, remains entirely undefeated. The confidence pervading the Japanese ranks is absolute and seemingly well-founded. Having crippled the American battle line at Pearl Harbor, conquered the Philippines, humiliated the British at Singapore, and seized an empire of 20 million square miles, they are poised to annihilate the last remnants of American naval power. Every officer, including Genda, operates under the conviction that the United States possesses at most 2 operational carriers, both assumed to be far away in the South Pacific, while the USS Yorktown is believed to be out of action for months. Relying on strict radio silence for security, the Japanese command has no suspicion that Admiral Chester Nimitz has been intercepting their communications for weeks. American cryptanalysts have successfully broken JN-25B, the Imperial Naval Code, revealing the enemy's intent. While Genda reviews his charts, 233 American aircraft are already being prepped on 3 carriers that intelligence reports insisted were not there. Within 14 hours, the myth of Japanese invincibility will be shattered, costing the Empire 4 irreplaceable carriers and over 3,057 of its elite aviators and crew members. The impending collapse begins, ironically, with mathematics that heavily favor Japan. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto leads a combined fleet that vastly outclasses American resources, 8 carriers to 3, 11 battleships to none, and a superior aircraft count. Operation MI involves 200 ships coordinated across millions of square miles, a plan bolstered by recent triumphs, including the surrender of 85,000 British troops at Singapore and the destruction of Allied fleets in the Java Sea. Despite the overwhelming odds, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo and his Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, have voiced concerns that the plan spreads their forces too thin. Yet, as with their doubts before Pearl Harbor, these warnings are dismissed by High Command. The operation proceeds on fatal assumptions documented in post-war interrogations: that American carriers are absent, that the Yorktown requires 3 months of repair, and, most dangerously, that radio silence guarantees total surprise. Meanwhile, in the stifling basement of Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team are deciphering the enemy's moves. By May 1942, they are reading enough naval traffic to identify a recurring objective coded as AF. Suspecting this target is Midway, Captain Jasper Holmes devises a ruse. Midway broadcasts a false unencrypted report about a water distillation failure. 2 days later, Japanese intelligence confirms the trap by reporting in their secure code that the AF air unit is running low on fresh water. This intelligence victory allows Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton to predict the Japanese order of battle, their approach routes, and the attack date of June 4th or 5th with stunning precision. Armed with this knowledge, Nimitz positions his carriers northeast of Midway, explicitly targeting the one sector where Japanese search patrols are known to be inadequate. The presence of the USS Yorktown at the battle serves as a testament to American industrial resolve. Although Japanese intelligence estimated the bomb damage from the Coral Sea would take 3 months to fix, Pearl Harbor repair crews achieved the impossible in just 72 hours. 1,400 men work around the clock from May 27th to the 29th, with teams remaining on board to continue repairs even as the carrier sails for Midway. Back on the Akagi at 4:30, Admiral Nagumo orders the launch of 108 aircraft, a balanced force of 36 Kate torpedo bombers, 36 Val dive bombers, and 36 Zero fighters. While the launch is executed with veteran precision, a critical lapse occurs. Nagumo deploys only 7 search planes instead of the doctrinal 22. To make matters worse, the scout plane from the cruiser Tone launches 30 minutes late due to catapult issues, a delay that will prove to be a catastrophic error. The element of surprise evaporates at 5:34 when PBY Catalina flying boats spot the fleet, followed shortly by Midway radar detecting the incoming strike. Every available American aircraft, from Marine fighters to B-17 bombers, is scrambled to meet the threat. By 7 o'clock, Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, leading the attack, radios back a crucial assessment. Midway's defenses are stronger than anticipated, and a second wave is necessary to neutralize the airfield. This message forces Admiral Nagumo into the battle's defining dilemma. His reserve aircraft are currently armed with armor-piercing ordnance for attacking ships, not land targets. He must now decide whether to rearm his fleet, a choice that will dictate the outcome of the battle and the fate of the Pacific War. At 7:15, with no enemy fleet visibly detected, the order was given to rearm the aircraft with fragmentation bombs for a second strike against ground targets. This critical decision, which was preserved in the surviving Japanese logs, unleashed absolute chaos across the hangar decks of the carriers. While strict naval doctrine dictated that unused ordnance be safely returned to the magazines below, the immense pressure of time forced the crews to take a fatal shortcut, leaving piles of high-explosive bombs and torpedoes dangerously stacked on the decks by 7:28. Just moments later, the delayed search plane from the cruiser Tona signaled the sighting of 10 enemy surface ships, bearing 010 degrees at a distance of 240 miles from Midway. This vague transmission sparked frantic speculation among the command staff about whether these vessels included the dreaded American carriers, prompting Admiral Nagumo to demand immediate confirmation of the ship types at 7:45. Agonizingly, the pilot's clarification would not arrive for another 30 critical minutes, leaving the fleet in a state of dangerous uncertainty. Between 9:20 and 10:20, 3 separate squadrons of American torpedo planes located the Japanese carrier force and launched attacks that appeared utterly suicidal. Flying obsolete TBD Devastators, the American pilots were forced to approach straight and level at a mere 120 knots, making them easy prey for Zero fighters capable of speeds nearing 330 knots. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet led the charge, but the slaughter was instantaneous. Of the 15 aircraft that began the run, 14 were shot down before they could effectively release their weapons. Ensign George Gay, the only survivor of that first wave, watched helplessly from the water as the Zeros made repeated, methodical passes to annihilate his entire squadron. The carnage continued with Torpedo Squadron 6 from the Enterprise, which lost 10 of its 14 planes, followed by Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron 3, which sacrificed 10 of 12 aircraft. Despite this immense heroism and loss of life, not a single American torpedo found its mark on a Japanese hull. In their after-action reports, the Japanese commanders dismissed these assaults as courageous but ultimately foolish endeavors. However, they failed to realize that these doomed runs had achieved a crucial strategic success by drawing the entire combat air patrol of Zero fighters down to sea level. By focusing entirely on the low-flying torpedo planes, the Japanese fleet had left the skies above completely stripped of high-altitude protection. Precisely at 10:20, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey arrived overhead with dive bombers from the Enterprise, Having successfully located the target after extending his search beyond the calculated intercept point, McCluskey had made a brilliant deduction to turn north, following the white wake of a lone destroyer racing to rejoin the main body of the fleet. He reported seeing carrier decks crowded with aircraft being readied for launch, and crucially, he noted that the sky around him was completely devoid of enemy fighters. The decisive attack commenced at 10:22, with Lieutenant Richard Best delivering a 1,000-pound bomb that smashed through the flight deck of the Akagi. The weapon detonated in the hangar directly amidst the unsecured ordnance, triggering a chain reaction of induced explosions that tore the flagship apart within seconds. At the same moment, dive bombers from the Yorktown converged on the Soryu, landing 3 direct hits that transformed the carrier into a raging inferno in less than 20 seconds. The carrier Kaga suffered 4 devastating hits from Enterprise bombers, including a strike near the forward elevator that ignited fully fueled aircraft packed on the deck. By 10:28, just 6 minutes after the first dive began, 3 of Japan's fleet carriers were mortally wounded. The statistics of the engagement were staggering. Of the 41 dive bombers that participated, only 3 were lost. Yet in those few moments, the balance of naval power in the Pacific had been permanently altered. The destruction of the Imperial fleet was a drawn-out process, meticulously documented later by surviving officers during post-war interrogations. The flagship, Akagi, burned for nearly 12 hours, with Captain Taijiro Aoki remaining on board to attempt salvage operations until 0200 on June 5th. Following Admiral Yamamoto's personal order to abandon ship, Japanese destroyers scuttled her at 0450, with 4 Type 93 torpedoes, sending her to the bottom at 0520, with 267 dead. On the Kaga, ruptured fire mains made the blaze uncontrollable, forcing Commander Takahisa Amagai to order the ship abandoned at 1640. She eventually exploded and sank at 1925, taking 811 men with her, the highest toll of the 4 carriers. The Soryu burned for 9 hours before sinking at 1913 on June 4th, carrying Captain Ryusaku Yanagimoto, who was last seen by survivors standing resolutely on the bridge, to his death, along with 711 of his crew. The Hiryu, the only Japanese carrier to survive the morning onslaught, managed to launch 2 counterstrikes that dealt mortal wounds to the American carrier Yorktown. However, retribution was swift. At 1700 hours, American dive bombers located the Hiryu and scored 4 crushing hits. She finally sank at 0900 on June 5th, taking Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi and Captain Tomeo Kaku down with her, resulting in a total loss of 416 lives. The resilience of the Yorktown showcased the superiority of American damage control. Despite sustaining 3 bomb hits from the first strike and 2 torpedo impacts from the second, she remained afloat for 2 full days. It was only after the Japanese submarine I-168 torpedoed her on June 6th that she finally succumbed, sinking on June 7th. The total cost for the United States was 307 dead, 1 carrier, the destroyer Hammond, and 150 aircraft. In contrast, the Japanese Navy suffered catastrophic losses, including 3,057 dead, 4 fleet carriers, and the heavy cruiser Mikuma, which was sunk on June 6th. They also lost 248 aircraft and 110 irreplaceable veteran aircrew. Post-war analysis confirmed that this victory was built on total intelligence dominance. A National Security Agency study, declassified in 2006, revealed that Station Hypo had predicted the date of the attack within a single day, providing the complete Japanese order of battle, approach routes, and even the occupation plans for Midway. Historical studies conclude that no military operation has ever commenced with such absolute knowledge of the enemy's intentions. At 23:55 on June 4th, Admiral Yamamoto officially cancelled Operation MI and ordered a general withdrawal. Despite commanding the most powerful surface fleet ever assembled, from the bridge of the super battleship Yamato, situated 300 miles behind the carriers, he found himself utterly powerless to alter the outcome of the battle. Official action reports indicate that Yamamoto briefly considered forcing a night surface engagement with his battleships, which his staff calculated could intercept the American fleet by 0200. However, the risk of facing American carriers at dawn without his own air cover was deemed unacceptable, leading to the cancellation of the offensive. This retreat marked a turning point, representing the first time in the war that a Japanese naval operation was abandoned as a direct result of enemy action. The impact of Midway extended far beyond the immediate material losses. Japan's strategic initiative in the Pacific was effectively extinguished on June 4, 1942. From that day forward, every major operation conducted by the Imperial Navy would be defensive or reactive in nature. The loss of human capital was particularly devastating, as the 110 aircrew killed were irreplaceable veterans, averaging over 800 flight hours each, with many having served since the China incident of 1937. While Japan's elite but limited pre-war training system produced only 100 pilots annually, the U.S. Navy was already churning out 2,500 new aviators every month. Ultimately, the Japanese naval doctrine, rooted in the concept of a single decisive battle, derived from their 1905 victory at Tsushima, had proven fatally obsolete in the face of modern carrier warfare. The American approach to naval combat effectively transformed the theater of war from a traditional test of warrior spirit into a cold contest defined by industrial output and intelligence gathering. Verified statistics from the era expose the sheer hopelessness of Japan's strategic position following the destruction of its carrier force at Midway. From that turning point until the war's end, Japan managed to complete only 12 carriers, whereas the United States launched a staggering 141 vessels, comprising 17 fleet carriers and 124 escort ships. In terms of aircraft manufacturing between 1942 and 1945, the disparity was equally stark, with Japan producing approximately 65,000 planes, compared to the United States, 297,000. This industrial imbalance was mirrored in the quality of human resources, particularly in the training of aviators by 1944. While Japanese pilots were being sent into combat with an average of only 150 to 200 flight hours, their American counterparts averaged more than 600 hours before ever facing the enemy. The economic foundation for this dominance was overwhelming. The national income of the United States was 17 times that of pre-war Japan, allowing American industry to supply 2/3 of all military equipment used by the Allied forces. Post-war technical analysis of the Japanese Navy revealed systematic vulnerabilities that went far beyond mere production numbers. Their carriers suffered from critical design flaws, such as enclosed hangar decks that trapped explosions, inadequate fire suppression systems, and insufficient ventilation, all of which made damage control nearly impossible. Similarly, the famous Zero fighter achieved its high performance by sacrificing survivability, lacking essential armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, while the pilots themselves operated without an effective search and rescue system to recover them when shot down. These material weaknesses were compounded by severe operational deficiencies that hindered effective decision-making at sea. For instance, Japanese search patterns were dangerously inadequate, utilizing only 7 planes, where doctrinal standards called for 22, leaving blind spots in their reconnaissance. Furthermore, despite a theoretical commitment to radio silence, actual discipline was poor, and the tactical doctrine remained rigid and inflexible, unable to adapt to the fluid nature of modern naval engagements. In contrast, American damage control capabilities, famously demonstrated by the USS Yorktown's survival through multiple attacks, reflected a superior philosophy of preservation over honorable death. Every crew member was trained in firefighting, supported by advanced equipment like carbon dioxide systems, foam generators, and portable pumps, as well as ship designs featuring redundant systems and better compartmentalization. Conversely, Japanese carriers proved fatally vulnerable to single hits, often succumbing to induced explosions of their own ordnance, a catastrophic problem that was identified but never corrected after the loss at Midway. The role of intelligence in securing victory was absolute, as highlighted by Admiral Nimitz in his post-war assessment. He noted that without early information regarding Japanese movements, American forces could have been caught dispersed, leading to a vastly different outcome at the Battle of Midway. The achievement of Station Hypo went far beyond simply breaking codes. They provided actionable intelligence that allowed for the precise positioning of American carriers, the conservation of resources by ignoring Japanese feints, and the achievement of tactical surprise despite significant numerical inferiority. Post-war interrogations and action reports further revealed deep-seated command problems within the Japanese Navy, including vacillation over rearming and a failure to launch available aircraft while under attack. These tactical errors were symptoms of broader strategic failures, such as relying on overly complex plans, requiring perfect timing, and dispersing forces for simultaneous operations in the Aleutians. Additionally, command critically underestimated American capabilities, choosing to ignore clear intelligence warnings regarding increased American radio traffic. The loss of veteran pilots at Midway triggered a devastating cascade effect that is clearly documented in Japanese training records. Before the battle, Japanese pilot training involved 500 to 700 hours spread over 2 years, but the post-Midway emergency program slashed this to between 150 and 200 hours, condensed into just 4 months. By 1944, the situation had deteriorated so severely that some pilots were being deployed with under 100 hours of flight experience. While Japanese standards plummeted, American pilot quality improved continuously, rising from a 400-hour average in 1942 to over 600 hours by 1944. This experience gap became insurmountable, culminating in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, where Japanese pilots with 200 hours of experience faced Americans with 3 times that amount. The result was a slaughter, with 346 Japanese aircraft lost, compared to just 30 American planes. The aftermath of Midway eventually forced the Japanese military to recognize the reality of American industrial supremacy. Captured documents revealed that their planners calculated that matching U.S. carrier production would require 300% of their total steel production, while matching aircraft output would demand 400% of their aluminum capacity. Furthermore, providing adequate pilot training required fuel oil reserves that Japan simply did not possess, making the mathematics of defeat entirely inescapable. The strategic consequences of Midway rippled through every subsequent Pacific operation, beginning with Guadalcanal in August 1942, where Japan was forced to commit forces piecemeal because it could not concentrate the carrier power lost months earlier. Even when they achieved a tactical victory at Santa Cruz in October 1942, the attrition was unsustainable, costing them 99 aircrew against only 26 Americans. This trajectory ended at the Philippine Sea in June 1944, where Japan's rebuilt carrier force was effectively destroyed, losing 476 aircraft and 450 aircrew in the event known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Midway also exposed technological disparities that only widened as the war progressed, particularly in detection and communication. While Americans utilized shipboard radar and talk-between-ships radio systems for coordination, the Japanese Navy relied on visual observation and archaic signaling with flags and lights. In the realm of intelligence, the Americans consistently read the JN-25 code, whereas the Japanese never succeeded in breaking American naval codes. And while U.S. production lines continuously improved designs, Japanese factories lacked the capacity to retool. Post-war interrogations and memoirs provide authenticated perspectives on these failures, including testimony from Captain Tairo Aoki of the Akagi, who confirmed that induced explosions from improperly stored ordnance doomed his ship, turning a single bomb hit into a catastrophe. Similarly, Commander Yasuji Watanabe, Admiral Yamamoto's operations officer, confirmed that Yamamoto immediately recognized the war was lost after Midway, a realization that was never stated publicly. Valuable tactical insights were also provided by Ensign George Gay, the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, whose detailed after-action report shed light on Japanese carrier operations during the attack. Modern historical analysis, particularly by Jonathan Parshall and Anthony Tully in their 2005 work, Shattered Sword, has corrected many persistent myths regarding the battle. Contrary to the belief that Japanese carriers were 5 minutes from launching a counterstrike when attacked, operational records show a minimum of 30 to 40 minutes was actually required. Other myths, such as the idea that Admiral Nagumo should have launched a partial strike, or the Japanese reconnaissance was merely unlucky, have been debunked by evidence showing that partial strikes were never practiced and that inadequate search patterns were a doctrinal choice, not an accident. The impact of the Battle of Midway extended far beyond the immediate conflict, offering enduring strategic lessons for the future of warfare. Ultimately, the engagement demonstrated that intelligence superiority and industrial capacity can decisively overcome numerical disadvantages and warrior ethos. The outcome of prolonged conflicts is ultimately dictated by industrial capacity, where the ability to adapt technologically far outweighs any initial superiority on the battlefield. History demonstrates that logistics and manufacturing output triumph over tactical brilliance, a lesson solidified as carrier doctrines shifted permanently after Midway to prioritize radar, electronic warfare, and damage control. Furthermore, the philosophy of personnel management evolved, placing a higher value on preserving skilled pilots rather than sacrificing them for the traditional concept of an honorable death. In his official report, Admiral Chester Nimitz characterized the engagement as a fundamental victory of intelligence, noting that while the United States was fully aware of the enemy's intentions, strength, and schedule, the Japanese remained completely in the dark. This sentiment was echoed by historian Mitsuru Yoshida, who observed that following the decisive events of June 4, 1942, the Imperial Navy was forced into a purely defensive posture. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey confirmed that the Japanese fleet never recovered from this blow, with every subsequent operation severely constrained by the devastating losses sustained over those 2 days. A statistical breakdown of the forces engaged reveals a stark contrast in composition. Japan deployed 4 fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, 11 battleships, 16 cruisers, 46 destroyers, and 248 carrier aircraft. Facing this armada, the United States fielded 3 fleet carriers, no battleships, 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, 233 carrier aircraft, and 127 land-based planes. The disparity in the resulting losses was even more profound, with Japan losing all 4 fleet carriers, a heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and over 3,057 men, including 110 elite aircrew. In comparison, American losses were limited to 1 fleet carrier, a single destroyer, 150 aircraft, and 307 lives. The temporal aspect of the battle highlights how quickly the tides of war can turn. Japanese forces enjoyed 5 hours of supremacy, from 4:30 to 9:28. Yet the decisive American counterattack occurred in a mere 6-minute window between 10:22 and 10:28. Although the full engagement spanned approximately 28 hours, from the early morning of June 4th to 900 on June 5th, Midway serves as enduring historical proof that intelligence and preparation are superior to surprise and brute strength. This confrontation demonstrated that industrial capacity surpasses warrior spirit, technological adaptation overcomes initial advantages, and hubris remains the deadliest enemy in warfare. The Japanese Navy arrived on June 4th with the most formidable carrier force ever assembled. Yet by sunset, that power was broken. Not by luck, but by American intelligence, preparation, and industrial might. In just 6 minutes of coordinated dive bomber strikes, the trajectory of the Pacific War was irrevocably determined, ensuring that every future battle would be fought under the shadow of a result already decided by production lines and codebreakers. Although Japan would continue to fight for another 3 years, the realistic hope for victory sank with their 4 carriers northwest of Midway on June 4th, 1942. This clash proved that modern naval warfare had evolved into a competition of intelligence, technology, and industrial production, where the American ability to replace losses overwhelmed Japanese tactical experience. In this violent collision, where the future effectively defeated the past, the U.S. Navy secured its greatest victory, validating the premise that democratic innovation could dismantle militaristic expertise. The Japanese arrived expecting an easy victory, but instead, they encountered the beginning of their empire's collapse.